On Thursday, the committee is going to go through those 187 minutes of inaction when Donald Trump did nothing to save our constitutional republic and the U.S. Capitol from the mob attacking it. The committee will attempt to fill in the blanks about what happened during that time. They're hinting they've got some new information. Throughout all these hearings, they have been incredibly consistent and rigorous about how the ultimate culpability for that dark day and what led up to it rests with Donald Trump. About how it was he that plucked out these seemingly random people, from a former federal prosecutor turned conspiracy theory promoter Sidney Powell to, well, the right-wing pillow-selling dude, to a random underling in environmental law, the Department of Justice, Jeffrey Clark, to another random right-wing law professor who became the author of the infamous coup memo, John Eastman. And he put this crew together to try to end American democracy. They didn't all know each other beforehand. It was Trump that got them together. It all flows from one man, Donald Trump. He is the one ultimately culpable. And if you view this entire undertaking as criminal, which, again, I'll admit I'm a little biased here, but it's hard not to do at this point, given all the evidence, there's no world in which the acts alleged to have been taken by people like Jeffrey Clark or John Eastman, who are now the subject of actual federal criminal investigation, there's no world in which those happened without the collaboration with and instruction from the guy at the top, Donald Trump. So if those were crimes, like he was the one sitting atop the criminal enterprise, the question then becomes, do you prosecute the ex-president? And I think part of the reason we've gotten to this point is because this is an individual who, even before he entered public life, political life, escaped accountability for all kinds of wildly egregious lawless behavior. That was his whole shtick from his very beginnings in New York real estate, when he and his father were accused of turning black tenants away from their properties, to allegations that he and his family inflated their real estate holdings for financing purposes and undervalued them for tax purposes, to his charitable foundation dissolving and being accused of, quote, shocking pattern of illegality, to more than a dozen sexual misconduct allegations. And he more or less escaped accountability while in office, when he was at least partially protected by the notion that sitting presidents cannot be indicted. But now, as the Justice Department debates this, he is telling people around him he's going to run for re-election as the ultimate get-out-of-jail-free card. It's the kind of strategy used by his first impeachment defense team.
Every public official that I know believes that his election is in the public interest. And mostly you're right. Your election is in the public interest. And if a president does something which he believes will help him get elected in the public interest, that cannot be the kind of quid pro quo that results in impeachment.
L'état, c'est moi. If it's good for me, it's good for the country. Anything good for me is good for the country. Ergo, there's no corrupt way to benefit myself. However, the fundamental question is, are we a nation of laws or of men? Can the most powerful person in the entire country, arguably the world, be subjected to our laws or not? And Trump, in his feral instinct for survival, understands that tension. He laid out his view of the presidency early on in the pandemic.
When somebody's the president of the United States, the authority is total. And that's the way it's got to be.
The authority is total.
It's total. And the governor's know.
Failing to do anything now would be the ultimate escape from accountability. So now it has become a test of our Department of Justice, our institutions, our collective wills, Americans, whether we are going to let that lawlessness stand and what it can mean for our long-term democracy. Aswin Subsang is a senior politics reporter at Rolling Stone. His latest piece is titled "Trump Tells Team He Needs to Be President Again to Save Himself from Criminal Probes." Olivia Nuzzi is the Washington correspondent for New York Magazine. She actually recently interviewed the ex-president for a piece titled "Donald Trump on 2024. I've already made that decision," and they both joined me now. Olivia, let me start with you because you just interviewed the man in question, and there were two things. There was the question of running for re-election, and the Jan 6 hearings, and they were clearly like both circulating his mind. What did you learn about the intention for running for re-election?
Well, when I asked him about it, at first he was a bit coy, saying, when I make my decision. When I pressed him on that, he claims that his mind is already made up, and it's really a question of whether or not he announces before or after the midterm elections. But, to your point about the investigations, many people around the president who I spoke to were talking about his concerns about facing prosecution. He's under investigation in all sorts of different jurisdictions in New York City, with the Department of Justice, in Georgia, Georgia. And the Georgia case in particular was cited to me as the one that he fears most, because that is a criminal probe. And according to these people that I spoke to, there are people who are advising the former president now, who were telling him that he has to announce before Lindsey Graham sits down and testifies before the grand jury in that case.
That's interesting that the Fulton County probe is the one that's weighing the most heavily.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a criminal probe, and there's also a tape that we've all probably heard at this point of him him threatening and saying that he needs to get more votes from the Secretary of State in Georgia, and we've all heard that. It's quite damning. He sounds a bit like a mob boss on that call, and I was told that that is the one that he fears most.
Swin, you've been reporting along similar lines, and I want to zero in on this idea of the idea that, like, if you run, it confers some immunity, whether that's legal immunity once you become president or some kind of armor where you can say everything against you is politically motivated. That seems to be a really front of mind rationale right now.
Oh, right. And going off of what Olivia was saying a moment ago, it's not just that there's one criminal investigation right now going on into Donald Trump's and his inner sanctum. It's that there are actually multiple. It's plural. They're criminal investigations. And when you talk to people who have spoken to former President Trump recently, when they are discussing the topic of a possible 2024 run, they will notice that he pivots pretty quickly as the conversation goes on to talking about the legal protections that come with the Oval Office, saying things like, oh, nasty prosecutors couldn't get away with this or get to me when I was president, or saying that when, not if, he likes to frame it as when he's president again, a Republican administration will put a stop to what is going on in the Biden Justice Department right now in terms of the investigation that's going on to him and some of his close associates who tried to overturn the 2020 presidential election. And the way he speaks, Olivia mentioned mafia talk earlier. He also kind of speaks in the form of David Mamet talk. So when he's connecting these two things in conversation, he's leaving confidants with the very distinct impression that the more these investigations and the January 6th hearings on Capitol Hill intensify, the more he starts having the legal protections of being the head of the executive branch front of mind.
There's also, Olivia, I mean, it's, you know, we have the committee hearings that are ongoing, and in your interview, it's very clear. I mean, this is like a person who obsessively watches TV, who is obsessively watching this, and even if, like, it's not reaching a huge amount of voters, it's very clearly, like, causing him anxiety and some frustration, and it's something he's very front of mind focused on.
Yeah, and remember, he doesn't have the kind of constant outlet that he had when he was not banned from Twitter, or when he can command the attention with a press conference anytime that he wanted. It's a lot harder for him, I think, to get people's attention, which probably explains, why he did an interview with me in part. But I think that, he's definitely frustrated by it. He was very, very preoccupied with Cassidy Hutchinson. When I asked him about certain aspects of her testimony that received a lot of attention, the image of him throwing a plate at the wall, he said it was, quote, not my thing, and that he had never thrown a plate at any wall in the White House. He also denied having lunged at a member of the Secret Service to try and direct his motorcade over to the Capitol as the crowd that became the insurrection marched over there. But he was very preoccupied with it. This is a man who watches his own coverage, who reads his own press, as we all know. He could be watching right now, for all we know. But I think besides the protections that the White House would afford him and did afford him previously, there's also just a perception that if you are actively running for president, that just that alone provides like a cocoon of legal protection, because it will render any type of probe, any decision from any jury, like a witch hunt. That's what he's being told. This looks like a witch hunt. And if you get out ahead of it, if you get out ahead of any leaks from a grand jury, say, you'll be able to basically control the narrative. So that's my understanding of the advice that he's getting now. And it's certainly not hard to believe that Donald Trump, given all that we know about him, is taking that quite seriously.
Yeah, and it's an important point, right? Because what it does is it attempts to unilaterally create this sense of what is political that kind of plays on these institutional fears that are clearly like running through parts of the Justice Department. Like, how will it look? But of course, the logic of that is you outsource it to the person accused, then you hand over the administration of justice to said person. You have to make your decisions independent of fear or favor. Aswin Subsang and Olivia Nuzzi, it was great to have you both. Thank you very much.